I heard men around me in other cells being tortured. Of course, I couldn't help but wonder, when's my turn? But I did a little bit of research. I learned that there are 193 fully recognized UN sovereign states. And I thought, well, maybe I could go to all of them.
Hello and welcome to the Pursuing Excellence podcast. My name is Stephanie Hajar, and today on the show we have Sam Goodwin. Sam is an American entrepreneur, author, and speaker. He's a former Division I athlete and co-founded a tech company in Singapore. He's also one of very few people who've traveled to every single country in the world. Every country in the world. Can you believe that? Sam is a thought leader on embracing uncertainty and now travels all around the world to share his experience and his story, and talks a little bit about a particular instance that happened as he traveled around the world. Sam was held hostage in Syria at one point, and he actually wrote a book about it. It's coming out September 10th. It's called Saving Sam, and it's all about his experience being held hostage and his family's fight to bring him home and what he experienced there. And let me tell you, it's a tearjerker and it's a miracle. And I mean it. Sam is the only American hostage to be held in Syria and be released. There have been a handful of other hostages, American hostages, taken captive in Syria, and not one of them, not one, has ever been released, other than Sam. I get the chills just saying it and just thinking about it. So when I say it's a miracle, this story is actually a miracle. It will restore hope. It will encourage you to persevere. It will do a lot. I won't give it all away, but I definitely recommend that you go pick up this book because you'll be glad that you did. So I hope that you enjoy this conversation with Sam Goodwin. Okay, well, Sam, kifak.
Damam. Kifak.
Niha.
Mm-hmm.
Are we gonna do the whole thing in Arabic? What do you think?
We're basically fluent.
Yeah,
But
we
you
are.
you learned yours through a classroom. I learned mine in prison. You were more responsible than me.
That's one way to learn Arabic. If you're gonna learn it, you could do
Mm,
it that way.
I don't recommend it.
You don't. I
No.
I want to hear the story about that, but first let me just welcome you to the Pursuing Excellence podcast. Thanks for
Thanks.
being here.
It's my pleasure.
So I like to start by telling people how I met the guests, but I kind of want you to tell that story. Do you
Sure.
remember?
So so you were the college roommate of my sister, Steph.
Hmm.
And to be frank, when you both were in college, I didn't really know who you were. I heard a little bit about, my sister's college roommate, but I was living in Asia at the time. I didn't really, wasn't really keeping tabs on all of that. But um, fast forward to 2019, and maybe we'll get into some of this story. But I was on a journey to travel to every country in the world, which I did finish. But like any worthwhile venture or endeavor in life, it wasn't without its challenges. And in the summer of 2019, I was wrongfully imprisoned in the Middle East in Syria. And thank God, thanks to a long list of people who worked tirelessly, the situation ended peacefully. And in the wake of that, I've been putting the pieces together and learning about everyone who worked on behalf of my case, from people who loved me to people who had no idea who I was. And one of the most significant things I learned is that although there were a range of people working on a peaceful resolution, it was actually the result, and the peaceful resolution can actually be traced back to you and to my sister, and the way that you were able to connect some dots in a pretty incredible way. and that led to me being released. And so, in the wake of that, I'm so grateful to say that we've come to know each other and have come to become friends in a way that probably would not have happened without this situation. So that was actually, I think, how we really came to know each other just over the past few years,
Yeah.
and um, it kind of got connected in a little bit of an unexpected way.
Yeah, for sure. I remember Steph talking about you when we were in college and you were living in Singapore at the time, which we'll get into that later. Um, and you were traveling around and she was kind of helping you post things on Instagram. And that's my first memory of having any kind of connection to you or just knowing who you were. And I thought that I met you once before, but it might have been a different brother. Because
Yeah,
I don't think you were ever there when I was there in Nashville.
yeah, I don't think so. I have two other brothers, so it was maybe one of them. But yeah, my Steph actually started my Instagram back in like 2014 or 2015. She was a little bit
Mhm.
more tech savvy than me, and helped kind of get that going. So yeah, that's a kind of a blast from the past.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so we'll get into that in just a minute, but I want to start by asking you, when you hear the words pursuing excellence, what comes to mind? Basically, what does it mean to you?
There are quite a few things that come to mind, but one thing I'll say is I think pursuing excellence is about doing hard and challenging things on our own terms. The more we sweat in peace, the less we bleed in war. And I think
Hmm.
that that statement has its roots in a military realm somewhere. But to me, it means that the more that we take action and we pursue challenging things on our own terms and pursue these obstacles and deliberately take action to be better, to gain knowledge, to gain skills, the more equipped we are to deal with challenges and obstacles when things happen not on our terms, outside of our control. And so that's one of the things that I think is meaningful and important to pursuing excellence in our everyday lives.
Hmm. I love that definition. I think that's great. Where does your desire to pursue excellence come from? From what I know, you've kind of pursued excellence in different ways sort of throughout your entire life. And I see that in your sister, Steph, as well. Where do you think that came from for you?
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. It's a bit of a circuitous route and a roller coaster ride all the time, as we all experience. But uh, the first place I would say it came from is my parents. I mean,
Mhm.
I think about my dad, and actually one of the other things, in addition to what I said about pursuing excellence, about pursuing hard things, is consistency. And I think that my dad's one of the most consistent people I've ever met in a range of different areas. So I think a lot of it came from my parents, and in addition to that, I think a lot of it came from being a competitive athlete. My For most of my life, I played hockey growing up, ended up playing in college, and the skills and traits that are developed through being a competitive athlete translate into many areas and facets of life: the mental toughness, critical thinking,
Mhm.
resilience. How often have we had a boss or a coach tell us control what you can control? Athletes have an unusual ability to deal with failure and to deal with being told no. And so I think maybe between my parents and kind of a career and a life as a competitive athlete, I think that's probably where some of that came from.
Mhm. That makes perfect sense. So that mindset of resilience and um, level-headedness started at a young age. It sounds like if it starts with your parents, it's got to start at a young age.
Yeah, I don't know how much of it kicked in at a young age, and
Sure.
probably still working on it today. But I do think that those examples and getting involved in those goals and ambitions early on was certainly huge.
Yeah, for sure. So then take me through young Sam playing hockey, oldest of however many siblings. and take me from there through playing hockey in college to then being in Singapore, and then we'll go from there.
Sure. So as I mentioned, played hockey growing up. Was fortunate to have some success with the sport. I earned an athletic scholarship to college. I played at Niagara University in upstate New York. And after that, well, really my senior year, I had pretty bad concussion injuries. I was unfortunately unable to play for a good chunk of my senior year because of the headaches and the post concussion syndrome. And by the time that by the time the headaches went away and I recovered, it had been about 8 months. I had missed most of the season. And several of the doctors told me that continuing to pursue hockey as a career could lead to permanent damage to my brain if I took another hit. So ultimately decided that that wasn't a responsible path, but that left me in a somewhat tricky place because for my entire life, I had never really considered doing anything else other than play hockey. So I had to explore some other paths. And so I just started networking. I reached out to college professors and uh, people who my family were connected to, just anyone who I thought might be able to help. And one of the people I reached out to was a former colleague of my father who was now living in Singapore and had a company there. And he actually responded sympathetic to my sympathetically to my concussion debacle and offered me an internship with his company in Singapore. And when I first got the email, I kind of thought it was crazy. Like I would never actually move to Asia. I don't even know why I sent that email to him. But as I thought about it a little bit more, I thought, you know what, I think I'm going to potentially give this a shot. And one thing that was very meaningful to me at that point was my parents, particularly my dad, said to me, "Hey, if you go to Singapore and things don't work out, just you can come home, and you can do that at any point." And I think that safety net was kind of the foundation of my adulthood, and I'm super grateful for that. But anyways, I went to Singapore. I worked this internship for a couple months, and while that was happening, I met another. I met a man who was starting a tech company, developing an online game for kids, and we kind of hit it off. And he ended up offering me a position, and I joined that company and ended up working there for the next 6 years, living and working in Asia. So I originally, only went to Singapore planning to be there for about 3 months, and I ended up staying for over half a decade. And it was a fantastic way to begin my professional career, working investor relations and business development and fundraising for this business, and just a great way for a number of reasons to begin my career.
So, as you're in Singapore, you're in a brand new country. People speak English there, but I'm sure there are other languages spoken around there, completely different culture. You seem to be somebody that has a sense of adventure. Was that always the case? Like when you first got to Singapore, were you curious to explore, or were you just there to do your job and pursue excellence in whatever it was that you were doing at that moment?
I think I was naturally curious to even consider going there in the first place. There's a little bit of that that's been inside of me since I can remember. I think back to in third grade, I made it to the championship round of my class's geography bee,
Mhm.
and I wasn't always the best student in school. I cared a lot more about playing hockey, and that's where I put pretty much all of my time and effort. But geography was kind of this outlier for whatever reason. And I remember my teacher read the final question. She said, "Name the largest and only Portuguese speaking country on the continent of South America." And I thought about it for about 10 seconds, and I was visualizing the globe next to my bed that my parents had given me. And then I answered Brazil, and that was the right answer. And I actually won the geography bee. And I remember I earned the prize was a 2-night homework pass at the time, which was a big deal in third grade.
Solid.
So that curiosity has kind of been within me somewhere from an early age. And I think when I got to
Mhm.
Singapore, it was an opportunity to sort of let that really expand. And I was I traveled as much as I could on weekends, holidays, time away from work, and travel was and remains maybe the best education I've ever had. And it was never about uh, ticking boxes or checking places off a list until things kind of adjusted later. But it was always about learning and a deeper understanding of the world. And being based in Singapore was sort of uh, a perfect storm for that.
Hmm. You mentioned that it was more about curiosity in the beginning and then maybe eventually became about checking boxes and scratching things off the list.
Yeah,
Can you
so
go ahead?
my style of travel changed just a little bit. In early 2018, I realized that I had traveled to about 120 countries in the world, and it was at this point I remember thinking, well, how many are there? As I mentioned, I always traveled because it was fun and I enjoyed it, but most importantly, I learned from it. It was an incredible education. But I did a little bit of research. I learned that there are 193 fully recognized UN sovereign states, and I thought, well, maybe I could go to all of them. And that competitive athlete in me likes setting goals and working toward achieving them. So I did some more research. I started looking at quite a few different things. I began with a map, my bank account, people who I knew in different places who might be able to help, visas that I might need, and ultimately decided that I was going to give it a shot. And I had no idea if I could do it, if I could travel to the rest of them, but I became committed to working toward achieving something that I thought was extraordinary, and so I went for
And it is extraordinary.
it.
It is. And at some point along the way, things went a little bit sideways, and you touched on that in the very beginning. I would love for you to tell us the story as much as you want about Syria and what happened there. And let's just start with that. You can tell as much as you want and give as many details or leave out as many details as you choose.
Yeah, sure. So as I maybe heard me say before, something I think about a lot, like with any worthwhile venture or endeavor in life, it's going to have challenges and detours and all kinds of obstacles. And perhaps most notably in the summer of 2019, I had traveled to 180 of 193 countries in the world, and I went to Syria. And when I arrived there, the regime took me hostage and accused me of being an American spy. They wrongfully imprisoned me and they held me for 9 weeks. And the situation became pretty uncomfortable. Solitary confinement, blindfolded interrogations, sham trials, a range of very uncomfortable situations within that 63 days. And uh, thank God, thanks to a long list of people who worked very hard in the situation, it ended peacefully. But in addition to those very challenging times, there's been so much good that's come from it as well on a number of different fronts, and um, that's kind of where a lot of my time is today, trying to focus on the positives and the good that's come from a challenging, truly life or death situation. But there's been a lot of positivity that's come from it.
Yeah. You mentioned solitary confinement. How many days were you in solitary confinement?
Solitary confinement is torture. It's a captivity tactic that's been used by cruel captors for centuries. I spent 27 days in solitary confinement. No window. It was all concrete. I had nothing but a small blanket to lay on the concrete floor as a bed. I heard men around me in other cells being tortured. Of course, I couldn't help but wonder, when's my turn? And I never stopped caring about dying or the long list of other bad things that I thought might happen, but I began to lose the energy to be afraid. Fear is an emotion and it takes energy to generate that emotion. And I was so psychologically and emotionally exhausted that I lost the energy to even generate the emotion. Normal or average prisoners spend their time counting down the days to the end of their sentence, but hostages, particularly in solitary confinement, they count up.
Mhm.
resulting in this overwhelmingly uncertain situation.
As you're in solitary confinement and you've now lost the energy to be fearful, what did you have the energy to do? And what emotions did you experience when fear was it just took too much out of you?
When I reflect back on my time in that cell, I found strength in three significant ways. The first, number one, I was pacing back and forth, and after several days of that, I finally stopped. I said, "Hang on a second. Maybe there's some good in this situation. Maybe there's some positivity here, something to be grateful for." And to that, an inner voice replied and said, "Sam, are you crazy? You've just been taken hostage. There's nothing good here. There's nothing to be grateful for. The best this will ever be is a period of your life you can forget." Well, I fought that inner voice and I said, "I'm grateful to be alive. I'm grateful for my health, my education. I'm grateful for the basic food and water I'm being given." I've encountered a lot of people around the world who don't have access to those things. Perhaps being in this cell would be an upgrade for them. I in that cell, Steph, I actually said to myself, "I'm grateful for the air that I'm breathing, and that the guard who just delivered me a boiled potato smiled at me for 1 second."
Mm,
These things may sound elementary or insignificant, but I found that each one of these small expressions of gratitude became this silent rebellion against the uncertainty of the situation.
mm,
So, number one, perhaps a bit paradoxically, was to lean into gratitude. Number two, after channeling a little bit of strength from the gratitude exercise, I didn't want to then just sit around and do nothing. Despite being in an 8 by 8 cell, I wanted to take action. This this is a bit counterintuitive because solitary confinement, by definition, means no action. There's no movement. It's confinement. It's isolation. But I wanted to take action and control the things I could control. Many things, maybe the majority of things, were out of my control. I couldn't control when or if I'd be released. I couldn't control whether they finally figured out I wasn't a spy. But I could control my thoughts, my attitude, my prayers. I could control how much water I drank and when I went to sleep at night. I could control my exercise. I did push ups, sit ups, core exercises. Essentially, I could control my routine within that cell. And my goal wasn't to get rid of negative thoughts and feelings. That's unrealistic. My goal was to change the way I responded to them. So number two was to control the things I could control.
mhm,
And then finally, number three, again, after several days of pacing back and forth, this strange transformative perspective began to emerge. Being taken hostage was as insane of a situation as I could have ever imagined being in. But I began to realize and believe that if I could maintain hope and persevere through this, I would then be better equipped to take on more challenges in my life going forward. And recognizing this opportunity for growth as I came to see it was what helped fuel me to get from 1 second to the next. I mean, to survive from 1 minute to the next, one day or week to the next.
mhm.
Uh, in this situation, in the years leading up to this situation, I had done a lot of growing. I had, as we talked about, I moved to Asia, helped start a tech company, coached hockey in different places around the world. I had traveled almost every country in the world, but now I was stuck. However, perhaps perhaps this is when I was growing the most. I was discovering that there's a big difference between what uncertainty feels like and what's actually happening. So
Mm.
number three was to recognize uncertainty as an opportunity for growth. So to answer your question, there were three key things. One was lean into gratitude. Two was to take action, and three was to recognize uncertainty as an opportunity.
You mentioned that you had hope and you used that uncertainty as an opportunity for growth. how specifically did you get to the point where you were like, I might die tomorrow or today in a minute. I could die in 30 minutes. They could take me and
Mm,
do whatever they want. How did you get to the point where you have that thought and you go, but I'm going to grow right now anyway, or I'm going to use this as an opportunity to grow, even if I don't know whether or not they're going to torture me, kill me, set me free, whatever. Yes, there's uncertainty, but usually when we think about growing, we think about, well, I'm going to grow today for tomorrow, but you don't know if there's a tomorrow when
mhm,
you're being held
mm.
hostage. So how did you balance those two ideas, not knowing if there's a tomorrow and not knowing if this growth would even yield any fruits?
Mm. It took me some time to get to that point. I wasn't just thrown into this situation and automatically leaned on these three things. It
Sure.
took it took time to develop them and think about them and find what I could actually lean on for strength. There are different phases of captivity, and the first part of it is just shock, just
Mhm.
having the floor of my life pulled out from underneath me dramatically and instantaneously. And then from there, it kind of moves into a coping, and then kind of moves into finding strength in it, and everybody kind of deals with it differently. For me, early on, and really throughout the entire situation, those three initiatives were very important to me. But what was most important to me was my faith. I grew up Catholic. My faith was a big part of my life, and my prayers became this uninterrupted conversation with God. I was constantly talking to him, pacing back and forth. I said things out loud. I said, God, I'm here. I'm listening. What are you trying to tell me today? What can I learn today? What are perhaps, again, as I was mentioning, what are perhaps the positives about my situation today? And my number one prayer was always, please keep me safe and peaceful. Please keep me physically unharmed. And my second prayer became, it was about the timeline. So if all of this was going to end peacefully, then the next question was when. And this was the prayer that for me became the most tricky and intense. And I remember almost positioning it as like a business deal. I said, God, I'm here, I'm listening, but I know you have a plan. But is it possible? Would you consider an adjustment to the timeline? Can that work with your plan?
Mhm.
And then I finished all of my prayers. I would say the rosary, just use my fingers. I would dedicate each decade to something different. I prayed for my family, my friends, anybody who I thought might be working to get me out of that situation. I prayed for world peace. I prayed very hard for the courage to forgive my captors. And through that, I discovered that I was working to forgive people who weren't even sorry. And that's some real strength. Forgiveness is
Mhm.
not a feeling, it's a choice.
Mhm.
So all of these things collectively, I think, helped me cope and address kind of the question that you asked about what if there's no tomorrow, and how do we cope with that? And it was kind of a range of all of these things together.
Yeah. I'm wondering if the energy that it took to think about these things and pray for the captors and keep your mind in sort of a neutral state. It wasn't super positive. It also wasn't super negative. You were in a neutral state. I wonder how much energy it took to be there versus to succumb to fear.
Well, I definitely found myself succumbing to fear, and it was a roller coaster ride. And I was in a situation where everything had been taken from me: my
Mhm.
communication, my material possessions, my freedom. But no matter what, I knew that there were some things I could control. I knew that my faith was absolute. And it took me time to get to these thoughts. And I became committed to leaning on the things that I could control, and leaning on my faith when everything else had been taken. I I felt this unbelievable closeness to God, strength in my faith that I never felt before. Were I learned that we're never less alone than when we're totally alone with God. that was something that I came to experience in a very dramatic way, and something that I think about every day of my life now. So it was again kind of all of these things together that collectively I found strength in.
Mhm. When you talk about it, it sounds like not quite, not that it came totally second nature to you, but that there was training that you did over time that when you got to this point, it was just kind of, it was plug and play maybe. It was still hard, of course,
Mhm.
but it sounds like maybe there was some practice that you had to train your mind to be able to do that, and then this was just the ultimate test. Is that true?
I think there is a little bit of that. As I mentioned, I found strength in lots of different ways. I leaned on perspectives that I had developed from traveling to different corners of the world, which provoked gratitude for just the basic food and water I was being given. I leaned on, again, as I mentioned, the skills and traits from being a competitive athlete, that mental toughness, resilience. I leaned on a belief that I had a purpose in life, and a desire to see family and friends again. And as I mentioned, most importantly, I leaned on my faith. And one thing that I think is relevant here is I don't think we can just magically expect our faith to support us in a time when we desperately need it and have nothing else if we don't work on it our entire lives. And so
Mhm.
I'm super grateful to my parents for instilling a strong Catholic faith into my four younger siblings and I throughout our entire life, because when I found myself in a situation where everything had been taken, I knew I can lean on that. I knew that my faith was absolute. And so that is something that I think about a lot in regards to your question about being prepared for this.
Mhm.
And it also goes back to what I was saying earlier about how the more we do challenging things on our own terms, the better we can deal with challenges and obstacles and uncertainties when they happen outside of our realm and outside of our control and not on our terms. And this certainly was something more extreme and totally outside of anything I could have imagined.
Mhm.
But I would have been in a different situation had I not had some of the experiences that I had. I found myself leaning on all of my previous experiences
Yeah.
in a bunch of different ways to get me through being truly at rock bottom,
Yeah.
literally and figuratively.
Literally. Yeah. So I have a question that might seem a little bit unrelated, and honestly, I might cut this out, but maybe not. When you talk about your faith and your parents instilling that faith in you when you were young, how did they do it to where you were able to grasp it and not reject it? It seems like your parents taught you about faith, talked to you about it, lived out their faith, and you and all of your siblings took to it and have made it your own in different ways and at different times in your lives. How do you think your parents did it well so that when you were in solitary confinement and you literally had nothing, you said you've never been less alone than when you were completely alone with God. How did it get to that point where you go, "Oh, I know I can lean on my faith," versus questioning like, "God, why am I here? Is there even a God? If there was a God, maybe I wouldn't even be here," that kind of thing.
Regarding the question about my parents and what they did, I'm struggling to articulate that. I've been thinking about that a lot now in my life. I'm the oldest of five. All five of us are engaged with our faith in some way, shape, or form. And frankly, that's somewhat, unfortunately, somewhat unusual, I think, in 2024. And I, I'm kind of, I've actually had this conversation with a couple of my siblings and even my parents a little bit, trying to actually answer this question. I think it's such a great question, and I don't know exactly what it was. I mean, of course, we went to mass every weekend. We said prayers before every meal. We did all these things before any of us moved out of college, moved out of the house for college. My mom would give us this little picture frame, and it had two bullet points written in it, and it said, "Go to mass, take care of the poor." And I don't really know exactly how those 2 points became the most important 2 things for her to communicate to an 18-year-old leaving the house. But all of these things, I think, collectively were part of this journey, and I don't know how it all exactly worked, I think about if I have kids, God willing, one day, I wanna be able to do the same thing, and
Mhm.
so I'm looking for that recipe. And I don't know exactly what the ingredients are for it. I think a lot of them are the things that we would think
Mhm.
the prayer, going to mass, being a good person, taking care of the poor. But I don't know if I can articulate it any further than that. And I hope that nobody listening to this ever needs to lean on this when they're in captivity because they were taken hostage. But it
Mhm.
can be relevant in so many different ways, and it's something that I think about quite a bit. And it's interesting to hear you ask that because I'm not exactly sure what the recipe looks like.
Yeah, yeah, I'm so curious because I see a lot of people go the opposite direction for all kinds of different
Hmm.
reasons, and a lot
Hmm.
of kids rejecting the faith that their parents, instilled in them or tried to instill in them, whatever that faith might be.
I think kids naturally push back against their parents
Yeah,
if they're at certain ages. So there's a balance there. There's a technique. There's a lot of variables, and
yeah,
it's really fascinating.
it is, it really is. Okay, so I'm gonna go back kind of to solitary confinement, being in captivity. You mentioned the 3 things that gave you strength, or the 3 ways that you gained strength and hope. The gratitude, controlling the controllables, and seeing that uncertainty as an opportunity for growth. In the moment, in the 27 days or 63 days that you were in captivity, were you consciously aware of what you were doing of those 3 things, or were you just doing what you thought was best, and then it ended up you looking back, you go, "Oh, it was these 3 things."
Yeah, I think it was kind of a combination. I
Mhm,
definitely did these. I took action on these 3 initiatives. It wasn't as succinct as maybe I communicated it a few minutes ago, and there were other things that I was doing to pass time and found strength in other things as well. But as I reflect and as I what I think is potentially most important right now, try to pull things out that are helpful and relevant to others in their own personal, professional, and spiritual lives. These are the 3 key elements that I used to embrace and manage uncertainty during a very tough time, and then I think can be helpful to others when they're facing their own breed of uncertainty and challenges in their own situations.
yeah, okay, that makes sense. Something that you and I have talked about quite a bit is the topic of trauma, and not just trauma, but sort of the 2 paths that somebody might go down. One of them after severe trauma, I'll say. So one of them is post-traumatic stress, and there's a disorder called post-traumatic stress disorder. And then the other path is post-traumatic growth. And it's very obvious that you have experienced post-traumatic growth. And seeing that uncertainty as an opportunity for growth, I think may have in the moment set you up for that. But I want to know through your eyes, from your perspective, having actually experienced that severe trauma, what specifically do you think led to your going down the path of post traumatic growth rather than severe post traumatic stress or it becoming post traumatic stress disorder?
Mhm. I have experienced some PTSD since I came home. Thankfully, I'm grateful to say it's been relatively mild, but I've had I've had some of that, and it's it's serious. And thankfully, I've been surrounded by an incredible support system, terrific family and friends, people in the government, doctors, all kinds of different people, and have been able to work through those episodes. And uh, so grateful to say that I feel healthy today, talking about it and kind of moving forward. As you mentioned, there's also this other medical term called PTG, which is post traumatic growth. And there are there are a lot of people who ask me, Sam, if you could go back, would you still travel the way you did, or still go on this trip? And on one hand, I would never want to relive captivity and wouldn't wish that on anybody. On the other hand, and I think more importantly, I would also never want to give up everything that's come from it. The opportunity to meet some remarkable people like you, as we talked about, to grow in character and in faith and in understanding of the the stuff in life that actually matters. And those two things go together, making it a somewhat challenging question to answer. But I'll say, Steph, I view the world through a spiritual lens, and I feel like I was given this this situation, this experience for a reason. And I don't feel so much survivor's guilt as I feel what I would potentially characterize as survivor's responsibility.
Mm.
I feel like I have a responsibility to reflect on a very tough time and pull messages and lessons out that could be helpful to others. This was a dramatic situation for me of rock bottom, teaching me things that a mountaintop never could.
Hmm.
There's this uh, there, bear with me, it may sound irrelevant for a second here, but do you remember trigonometry in math class? There was trigonometry and there was the sine curve, right? And sine curve is this never ending up and down radio wave. And something that I think about a lot is what I consider or sometimes label as the sine curve of life. And we ride this roller coaster, never ending up and down. And when we're at the top of the curve and things are going well, it's important to have humility and awareness and gratitude. But nothing deeply good emerges from the top. It's at the bottom of the curve when we're facing our biggest challenges, when all of the growth happens. And that is something that I reflect on here when I think about my uh, my situation. I think if we are all honest with ourselves, we will say that our personality today, and the very essence of our life, is a result of the challenges we've faced and the choices we made as a result of those challenges, not because of the good times that we've had.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree. There's a quote that I put up on the board for my class almost every semester, and I'm forgetting who said it. I'm forgetting, but I'll put it up. I'll put it up in the edit. It says, "One only sees small things from the peak, and no, hold on. One sees great things from the valley, only small things from the peak."
Yeah,
And that's
love that.
literally what you just
Love that.
described.
Love it. Send me it. I want to take a
Yeah, I
picture.
will. I
I
will.
want to see it.
Yeah, I'll
Yeah.
send it to you. So this idea of post-traumatic growth is that exactly, is being in the valley, going through the tough time and seeking the lessons from it. It's, at least that's what it sounds like you did. You sought lessons and you sought a purpose. Did you did you think about that purpose in the midst of it, or was it afterwards that you went, this had to have been for some kind of reason, like there's a reason I went through this, now I'm going to do something with it? How did you get to that point?
I thought a little bit about it as it was evolving and as I was living it.
Mhm.
Frankly, I was such a disaster and there were so many things going on. It was a whirlwind, and I was probably most focused on whether or not I was going to have my head cut off. I thought I was going to be killed, and probably in a pretty gruesome way. So I certainly wasn't thinking super coherently or logically at the time, but as I reflected and I think so much of this is just a result of being surrounded by great people like you and my family and great friends, and we become who we surround ourselves with. That's a whole other topic of conversation, but it was very, it was and remains very relevant to me. I don't think I would not have been able to reflect and pull messages from this in the same way if I wouldn't have been surrounded by great people. So it
Mm.
was a combination of kind of feeling the survivor's responsibility as I felt, and some of that I think comes from a spiritual standpoint, but also being surrounded by great people. It was certainly a team effort, and
Mhm.
with those kind of things working together, I'm kind of gotten to where I am today. But it's also something that's always evolving. It's something that I'm always reflecting on and thinking about new angles. There are so many lenses that things can be viewed through, and as a
Mhm.
result, so many lessons and messages that I think can potentially be pulled out from it.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. That's such a blessing to have such a great support system around you and to have so many incredible people to support you the second you got out of prison.
Totally, and
Yeah.
it's yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
So coming from the background that I come from, I know what it takes to heal a trauma, and one of the things that it takes is um sort of a reframing of what the experience was, and not seeing the like if you were to watch it on a movie screen, not seeing it through your own eyes and reliving it over and over again in the exact same context with all the same emotions. You almost have to override that experience with maybe a different lens over the eyes, a color filter. Um, Maybe you experience it from someone else's perspective, from God's perspective, from whoever's, and maybe the doom and gloom inside the head has to change to something. It's just something different. So you're experiencing the same event, but all the filters have changed, and you have told this story over and over and over and over again. And I think most people, if they think about their own traumas, maybe some that are healed or unhealed or in the midst of being healed, if we think about telling a traumatic story that we experienced over and over and over again, it seems like we would just get stuck in it and relive it and never be able to get out. But this post traumatic growth sort of is the result of a little shift in the story, whether it's perspective, it's putting a purpose on it, it's taking responsibility for something in it. There's just something that has to change in the story. I'm curious to know what helped you to get to that point of post traumatic growth and not tell the story over and over again or relive it over and over again when you were talking with everybody and figuring out who did what, how did these pieces come together, how did you hear the story, tell the story without re-experiencing every single moment of anxiety and fear and pain and despair that you had in those moments?
Mm. So the first thing I would say to that is prayer was so important, and so were the people I was surrounded with. However, when I first came home, there was part of me that wanted to take this entire experience, put it in a box, never think about it again.
Of course.
Interestingly, or maybe interestingly, at least for me, and I know many of us deal with our traumas and challenges differently, but talking about the story and what happened ha- became and has become therapeutic for me. And
Mhm.
maybe my brain just functions a little bit weird, but I actually, in my mind, when I'm sharing the story and the speaking about it and the lessons and the message that that I've kind of pulled from it, I feel as though I'm spreading out the burden. to all of the people who are listening, all of the people in the audience. So in my
Mhm.
mind, I'm thinking, congratulations to all of you. This is now partly your problem too, partly your situation, and it almost feels like I'm spreading all of this out. And interestingly, people have been receptive to that. They've even kind of mentioned things like that, like I'm happy to have a piece of this, or be part of this journey and sports. So that's and I don't know that I planned it that way. I wasn't thinking like, oh, if I go and speak about what I learned, then it'll be therapeutic and help.
Mhm.
I don't think I'm astute enough to think about that when this started, but just over time, that's how it's kind of developed for me. So I don't know if that's helpful to others, and maybe there are ways that sharing the details of our trauma, of our challenges, of our situations can be therapeutic and helpful. But for me, that's I found it to be.
Mhm. I think the meaning that you attach to the story makes a big difference. And when you tell your story, there is a deeper meaning or a greater purpose and lessons to be learned. Whereas maybe if you didn't or you hadn't extracted those things, you might have had a different experience by telling your story over and over again.
Yeah, great point. And there's it's one thing for uh, a speaker. I mean, I speak for a living now, sharing this story and the messages around it. And it's one thing for someone to come in and share a story and entertain people. And my presentations certainly include that story. It's narrative driven, but where most of my focus has been when it comes to speaking and my presentations today and the organizations, firms, and groups that I speak to, it's been around what is the message. It's essentially when I'm. It's funny when I'm working with event planners and or CEOs or HR, who's ever managing an event, they'll always say to me, maybe in different words, but they basically say, "Cool story, Sam, but what do we do with this?
Mm,
What is our firm? What's our company going to do with your message? What are your takeaways?" And so it's one thing to just share the story and the drama of what happened, but where a lot of my focus has been around what can be pulled from this that's helpful to others. And actually, I've found that the more I make my business about other people, the better the business takes care of me. And I'm sure
mhm,
you can relate to that as well.
mhm.
In addition to that, I've also written a book that's coming out in September, as you know, and that was also therapeutic as well, to kind of consolidate things and get it on paper and kind of reflect on what's most important here, and what can be learned from the book is, of course, this. It's an unforgettable story that includes celebrities and heads of state, high stakes diplomacy, a travel journey to every country in the world, but perhaps more importantly, it's about what we all learn through the experience that we believe can help others today. It's about how we can all turn our own challenges and adversities into assets. I mean,
Mm,
I don't want to be known for the things that happen to me. I want to be known for the way I've responded to them.
mhm.
And I hope the readers of this book, or people who hear me speak, they'll adopt a similar mindset and implement it into their own personal and professional lives.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. And that actually kind of leads into my next question, which is about identity. As you played hockey in college, that was the thing you did. And
Mm,
you got to a point where you literally could not play another game or you ran the risk of having a serious brain injury or perhaps dying. And a lot of people in those sort of situations identify themselves as the hockey player. I did it too when I first started
mm,
my career. I was the mental wellness coach. Like this is what I
mhm.
did. And not only was it the thing that I did, it was who I was. How did you go from playing hockey to then going into your career to then being held captive and getting out of it and not identifying yourself solely as the hockey player. And then all of a sudden, you're not a hockey player. You got to figure out who you are. And then not being the guy who was held captive or the guy who was held hostage and being so much more than that. That was just the thing that happened to you. Playing hockey was just the thing that you did. How do you how do you identify yourself, if at all? And
Mhm.
and how do you not identify yourself as the thing that happened to you or the thing that you did?
Yeah. So you're right. I think there are if they're asked who's Sam Goodwin, they would say a hockey player, and other people would say, he's the guy who went to every country, and then other people would say he was the guy who was taken hostage. So there's there are these different kind of chapters or experiences that we've had, and I think that excuse me, I think that oh, it doesn't define me. It has become a part of who I am, and I
Mhm.
think I'll always be leaning on lessons that I learned and things that I took and the ways that I grew through that for the rest of my life. But there were a lot of people who said life was over, but in truth, it was just getting going.
Mhm.
And one of the things that I tell typically tell younger people is I think one of the challenges that they have is a poor relationship with time. And what I mean by that is young people, I mean, they could move forward and do nothing right for a decade and still be young. And so I think that the way that we view that, I think there's a lot of opportunities for improvement. But for me, as far as identity, I yeah, I've been fortunate to do a range of different things. But really, if I boiled it down, I would just want to be remembered as someone who gave more than I took. So that's the identity that I tried to work towards.
That's so good. I love that. I don't know if I was expecting that to be your answer. That's really good.
Good,
Okay,
got to
I
keep
just
you on your toes, Steph.
yeah, that's right, that's right. I just have a couple more questions for you. Um, the first one is about this concept of it's called they call it post-Olympic depression. I'm doing air quotes.
Mhm,
And it's this idea that, a lot of Olympians or people, athletes go to the Olympics. This is the pinnacle, the peak of their athletic competition. This is what they've worked their entire lives for. They go, they win a medal or they don't, whatever. Now they can call themselves an Olympian for the rest of their lives. But when they come home, because they've just experienced the thing that they've been working for however many years, they come home and the thought or the question is, now what? I've done all there is to do in my sport or in my career.
mhm.
Now what? And you've visited every single country in the world. You've seen almost everything that there is to see. So what keeps you going when maybe the question of now what pops into your head, or if maybe it doesn't at all, but what keeps you going in the midst of that when you've seen all there is to see and done all there is to do?
Well, for me, this actually goes back to the first topic of this interview that we had, and it's about continuing to challenge ourselves and pursue challenging things on our own terms. In the past couple years, uh, I I started a doctorate program at Johns Hopkins that I graduated from just a few weeks ago. So continued to pursue that. About 3 months ago, I started doing training for a private pilot license, something that I had no idea how to do. I jumped into it. I sucked. It was so hard. I had no idea what I was doing. But I am now about 3 months in. I have about 30 hours of flying, which in
So cool.
pilot land is still total rookie status. But but it's been fun and it's been challenging. It's been something new. It's about pursuing hard things on on our own terms. And so for me, I guess it's just in my blood again, been supported by by fantastic people, but we can all pursue our post Olympic time in different ways if we choose to be proactive and to be ambitious. So there's you mentioned that I've seen everything or something like that. That's so far from true in my opinion. And so there's just so many ways that we can continue to be ambitious and pursue different things, but it takes a concerted and specific effort to do that.
Yeah, definitely. I want to commend you for pursuing, in your words, hard things and not just pursuing the next dopamine hit. Like you could have pursued, I don't know, something that's maybe not as hard, but you get a great big dopamine hit at the end of it, or whatever. But your effort and your determination to pursue hard things, I think, is a little bit rare. What makes you want to pursue hard things rather than just coast? You can coast now if you want, but you continue to pursue hard things. What makes you want to do that?
One of the things that I think prohibits a lot of people from doing this is linked to what I consider to be the best advice I've ever gotten, and that is um, it's I'm trying to think of the best way to say this, but the best advice I've ever gotten is living our lives and making decisions based on other people's judgments is the quickest way to be unhappy. And so I think a lot of my pursuit of the next goal or being ambitious is just not giving a shit what other people think. And it's taken me time to get to that point, but it's truly the best advice I've ever gotten. And when we reach that point, and I'm still working towards it, there's always,
Sure.
people always have their own, there's always judgments, and especially in today's digital world, it's so easy, especially from behind a screen, to reduce someone down to an unconfirmed set of assumptions. But uh, that, I think, once we can overcome that, it really opens up this broad world of pursuing new things once we stop caring what other people think about us.
1,000%. 1,000%. Okay. I want to know, and you kind of have already touched on this, but I want to know, how do you pursue excellence in your daily life?
The first thing that comes to mind when I hear that question is, actually, this also goes back to the beginning of the interview, and it's kind of linked to my dad. I just think consistency. I think
Mhm.
consistency is one of the most important virtues, mentally, spiritually, physically, academically, whatever pursuing. That consistency is is so powerful. So that's one of the first thing that comes to mind when I hear that question.
Yeah. Yeah, consistency is definitely key. All right, 2 more. The first one is, what's a question you wish people would stop asking you?
uh, so when I speak, I always have a Q and A, and the most common question that I get, it's like clockwork. I just plan for it, is what's your favorite country? And it's funny because
Of course.
I just know it's coming. It doesn't matter if I'm speaking to college students or to a room of CEOs. It comes every single time. And I wouldn't say that I want people to stop asking me it. It's just been interesting uh, to to experience the way that that question is asked without fail every night.
Yeah, and your answer is always Lebanon, correct?
Yes, that's right, Steph. That is right.
Okay, the next one is, what's one question you wish people would ask you?
I wish more people would ask me, what's the best advice you've ever gotten, because I would like to be able to talk a little bit about that more, and it's not directly linked to kind of what I speak about directly, but
Sure.
I would, it sometimes people ask, or some version of it, and I'm always excited to kind of, nail, hammer, just hammer that one.
Hmm. What is it about that piece of advice that is most uh, it touches your heart? What is it about that piece of advice that touches your heart most, that sinks deep and you go, "Oh, yeah, like this is the best piece of advice."
I delayed what I'm doing right now, my speaking business, and sharing the story and the messages around it, because I cared what people think. And the reason that this is so important to me is because what I'm doing today, and what I love doing, and maybe will be fortunate to do, to continue to do, is because I got to that point. Or I shouldn't even say I've got there, because I've made progress on that concept and that point. It's just incredibly liberating, and I really believe in the power of it, and I wouldn't be doing, like, literally what I'm doing today without having addressed it to some extent, and made progress on it. So that's why it's something that's helped me specifically, that's helped me a lot, and
Mhm.
um so I'm committed to trying to share that with others, and hopefully they can find a similar power in it, similar strength in it.
Yeah, yeah. I can relate. I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing right now if I hadn't made progress
Of
on that
course,
too.
Steph, that's dumb. You're going to try to start your own thing. Why don't you go? No, just you're supposed to go and fit in a box that society has already set up for us. And if you don't do that, well, you're insane and you're crazy and you're dumb. And that's how it's supposed to be.
Yep. Yep. Not anymore.
Nope,
Not
not
anymore.
anymore. That's why we have this podcast.
That's right. That's why we have this show, for sure. Okay, Sam, how can people find you? How can we support you? Let's start with that. How can we support you and how can we find you?
Yeah, thanks. I'm online on the main social media platforms. Would love to connect with you there. Feel free to reach out anytime. I also have as I mentioned, I have a book coming out on September 10th, 2024, which is um, exciting, and it's been a labor of love, but a lot of work. So a lot of what we talked about today is in there, but in longer form, and there's more to it. So if you're interested in learning more, there's that opportunity. And as I mentioned, I'm speaking professionally full time, and so if anyone is involved with an event for their organization where they believe that my message could add value, I would be honored to be in touch and be considered as someone to get involved there. So please reach out anytime, and really enjoyed this conversation.
Well, thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for the way that you pursue excellence and you help other people to pursue excellence. I think it's so incredible. I think people are going to learn so many things from your book too, and how you dealt with extreme uncertainty, extreme circumstances. And I think it's going to touch a lot of people's lives and do a lot of good in the world. So thank you for getting to that point or making progress to the point where you can share your story and not care what other people think, but really focus your time and attention and your efforts on helping others, serving others, and making it about them. And so because of that, we can gain and we can learn and we can grow. So thank you, Sam. Thanks for your time. Thanks for this conversation. And I'm looking forward to chatting with you again soon. And I hope everybody goes and buys the book, samgoodwin.com slash
Yeah, slash book. It's on
book.
Amazon as
Okay.
well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That's right. All right. Well, thanks again. And I'll see you soon.